1 year later, under a gray African sky, Ethan Miller stood on a strip of red earth in Namibia and stared at a lion that might not remember him. The lion was nearly 100 yards away, standing on a low ridge where the dry grass bent in the wind. He was no longer the trembling cub Ethan had once carried in his arms. His shoulders were broad now. His young mane had thickened around his face. His eyes were steady, wild, and unreadable. Beside Ethan, his younger brother Luke did not move. Behind them, Dr. Samuel Hayes spoke in a voice so low it was almost swallowed by the wind. "Do not call him. Do not step toward him. And whatever happens, do not run." Ethan heard the warning, but it felt distant. All he could see was the dark mark beneath the lion's left eye, a small shadow in the fur shaped almost like a tear. Rain. That was what they had named him. A year had passed since they had left him here. A year of letters that grew shorter. A year of silence. A year of wondering whether the lion they loved had learned to hunt, found a pride, survived the drought, or died somewhere beyond the reach of every human hand. And now he was standing there, alive. But alive was not the same as safe. Alive was not the same as gentle. Alive was not the same as remembering. "He may see you as strangers," Dr. Hayes said. "He may see you as a threat." Luke swallowed hard. "And if he doesn't?" Dr. Hayes did not answer. The lion lowered his head slightly. Then, very slowly, he began to walk down the ridge. To understand why two grown men would fly halfway across the world to stand unprotected before a lion, you have to go back to a rainstorm in Savannah, Georgia, when none of this had yet become a story people would one day struggle to believe. It was the fall of 1971, and Ethan Miller had only gone into Marley's Exotic Pets because Luke needed dog food. The shop sat between a pawn store and a closed bait shop near the old river market. His front window was fogged from the rain. Inside, the air smelled of damp sawdust, feathers, old metal cages, and something sour Ethan could not name. Luke was already complaining before the bell above the door stopped ringing. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. Ethan barely heard him. In the back corner, beneath a leaking patch in the ceiling, a small iron cage sat half-covered with a dirty canvas sheet. Water dripped steadily from above, tapping the floor, tapping the bars, tapping the thin golden back of the animal curled inside. At first, Ethan thought it was a dog. Then the cub lifted his head. A lion. Not a picture. Not a toy. Not some circus poster on the wall. A real lion cub, maybe 10 weeks old, with oversized paws, dull golden fur, and eyes too tired for something so young. Under his left eye was a dark streak of fur, like a tear that had never dried. Mr. Marley, the owner, came out from behind the counter wiping his hands on a towel. "Pretty thing, isn't he?" he said. "Got him from a private breeder upstate." Buyer backed out. Luke stared at the cage. "You're selling a lion?" Marley shrugged. "Folks buy stranger things." The cub pressed himself deeper into the corner as thunder rolled over the roof. He did not growl. He did not snarl. He just watched Ethan through the bars with a stillness that made the rest of the shop seem to disappear. Ethan had seen that look before, not in an animal, in himself. The year before, he had buried the woman he was supposed to marry. Since then, he had gone to work, fixed boats, paid bills, spoken when spoken to, and let the world move around him as if he were still part of it. But some part of him had stayed behind, locked in a place no one could reach. And now this small, rain-soaked creature was looking at him from behind iron bars as if it knew exactly what it meant to be trapped. Luke touched his arm. "Ethan." "No." Marley leaned on the counter. "If you're interested, you better decide soon. Man from a traveling animal act down in Florida is coming through next week. Says he can use a young lion." The words changed the room. Ethan looked back at the cub. The water kept falling through the ceiling, drop after drop, landing on the dirty floor around him. Luke shook his head. "We don't know anything about lions." "No," Ethan said quietly. "We don't have the money." "I know. We can't just buy a lion." Ethan stepped closer to the cage. The cub did not move away this time. "No," Ethan said, "but we can't leave him here." By sundown, the rain had turned the streets silver, and two brothers who had come to buy dog food walked out of Marley's Exotic Pets with a wooden crate, nearly empty pockets, and a lion cub who had no idea that his life had just changed forever. They took him to the old boat shed behind their family workshop, down by the Savannah River. Luke spread blankets on the floor while Ethan warmed milk on a portable stove, both of them moving with the nervous tenderness of men handling something precious and impossible. For hours, the cub would not eat. Then rain began to drum softly on the tin roof. The sound filled the shed, steady and gentle, the same sound that had followed him from the shop. The cub lifted his head, crawled toward Ethan's boot, and rested his chin on the worn leather. Ethan looked down at him. Luke stood in the doorway, arms folded, trying not to smile. "So what do we call him?" Outside, the storm rolled over the river. Inside, the cub closed his eyes for the first time. Ethan reached down, careful not to startle him. "Rain," he said, and just like that, a name became a promise. For the first few weeks, Rain was less like a lion than a secret the whole river seemed to be keeping. Ethan and Luke built a pen inside the old boat shed with scrap lumber, chicken wire, and more hope than sense. They read every book they could find, called every veterinarian who would listen, and learned quickly that loving a lion was not the same as knowing what to do with one. Rain drank from a bottle wrapped in an old towel. He slept in a pile of blankets near the stove. When thunder rolled over the Savannah River, he would lift his head, listen to the rain on the tin roof, then crawl toward Ethan as if that sound told him he was safe. Luke was the first to make him play. He tied an old boat rope into a knot and dragged it across the floor. Rain watched it for a long time, his ears twitching, then pounced so awkwardly that he rolled over his own paws. Luke laughed so hard he had to sit down. Ethan had not heard that kind of laughter in the shed for a long time. Slowly, the place changed. The boat shed that had once smelled only of oil, river mud, and old wood began to smell of straw and warm milk. Scratch marks appeared on the posts. Paw prints dried across the floorboards. Rain grew stronger, heavier, brighter. The dullness left his eyes, and the little dark mark beneath his left eye became the thing everyone noticed first. By Christmas, the town knew. At first, people came by out of curiosity. Fishermen leaned against the dock and asked if the rumors were true. Children pointed from the road. Old Mrs. Bennett, who had taught biology at the high school for nearly 30 years, came with a notebook and a quiet look of concern. "He is beautiful," she said, watching Rain bat at a coil of rope. "But beauty does not make him tame." Ethan nodded, though he did not want to hear it. Rain was gentle. That was what Ethan kept telling himself. Rain knew Luke's whistle. He knew the sound of Ethan's truck. He knew not to bite hard when they played. He would lie beside Ethan at sunset while the river turned gold, his head resting against Ethan's boot as if he had chosen him out of everyone in the world. Before long, folks started calling him the River Lion. For a while, it almost felt harmless. But lions do not stay small because people love them. By spring, Rain's paws were wider than Ethan's palm. His shoulders rose higher every week. When he jumped against the pen, the walls shook. When he tugged on a rope, Luke had to brace both feet against the floor. His baby teeth had been replaced by something longer, whiter, and frighteningly real. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Luke was playing with Rain on the dock behind the shed, tossing an old canvas buoy and laughing as Rain chased it. The river was calm. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed wood. Ethan was under a boat hull, tightening a bolt, when he heard Luke shout. Not a playful shout, a sharp one. Ethan crawled out and saw Luke on his back against the planks, one sleeve torn, blood running down his forearm. Rain stood a few feet away, frozen. His tail was low. His ears were back. He looked from Luke to the blood and then to Ethan, confused and terrified by his own strength. Luke sat up, breathing hard. "I'm fine," he said. "Ethan, I'm fine." But Ethan could not move, because in that moment he understood the thing he had been trying not to understand. Rain had not meant to hurt anyone. He had not been angry. He had not turned wild. He had only played the way a lion plays, and that was enough. A week later, a storm came in from the coast. The wind hit the river hard, slamming rain against the windows and rattling the tin roof like loose chains. Near midnight, an old side door in the shed, weakened by years of salt air, blew open. Rain got out. He did not run far. He wandered down the muddy road past the bait shop, past 3 sleeping houses, past Deputy Carl Whitman's place at the edge of town. Carl's little girl, Abby, woke to the sound of rain against her window. When she pulled back the curtain, she saw a lion standing beneath the street lamp, water running down his mane, his yellow eyes reflecting the porch light. Her scream woke half the neighborhood. By morning, Savannah's riverfront was full of police cars, shouting men, and frightened parents. Rain had been found near the docks and led back with meat and patience, but the damage was done. Deputy Whitman arrived at the boat shed before noon. He was not cruel. That almost made it worse. He stood across from Ethan with his hat in his hands and looked at Rain through the fence. "I know you love him," Carl said, "but a lion doesn't have to hate anybody to hurt them. He only has to grow up." Luke looked away. Ethan said nothing. Carl handed him a folded notice from the county. 14 days. That was how long they had to remove Rain from the property. If they failed, the county would seize him. And the first offer already waiting was from a traveling animal show headed south through Florida. Behind the fence, Rain pressed his great head against the wire, watching Ethan with the same dark, tear-marked face from the shop window. Only now, he was no longer small enough to save with a wooden crate and empty pockets. He was becoming a lion, and love, Ethan was beginning to learn, might not be enough to keep him. Mrs. Clara Bennett was the one who found Dr. Samuel Hayes. She came to the boat shed 2 days after the county notice, carrying a folder under one arm and wearing the same serious expression she had once used on students who mistook opinion for fact. "There may be another way," she told Ethan. The name inside her folder was Dr. Samuel Hayes, an American conservation biologist who had spent years working with lions in Namibia. He ran a remote rehabilitation site where captive-born lions were given one last chance to become what nature had intended them to be. But when Hayes called, his voice carried no comfort. "You need to understand something," he said. "A lion raised by people may never survive in open country. He may not hunt. He may not read danger. He may walk straight into the thing a wild lion would avoid." Ethan gripped the phone until his knuckles whitened. "Then why send him?" "Because a cage is not a life," Hayes said. "It is only a slower kind of death." For 3 nights, Ethan refused to decide. Luke finally found him sitting alone in the shed beside Rain's pen, listening to rain tap against the roof. Rain was stretched along the fence, his massive head near Ethan's hand. "You're not just trying to save him," Luke said quietly. "You're trying not to lose anyone else." Ethan turned, anger flashing across his face. Then it faded because the truth had already landed. Rain had come into his life when grief had made him hollow. Somewhere along the way, saving the cub had become the thing that saved him. And now real love was asking him to let that very thing go. 2 weeks later, Rain left Georgia in a reinforced transport crate. Ethan and Luke flew with him as far as they were allowed, then followed Dr. Hayes across the dry, open country of Namibia. Everything felt wrong at first. No river, no tin roof, no smell of salt water or old boats. Only red earth, thorn trees, pale grass, and a sky so wide it made Ethan feel small. When the crate door opened, Rain did not step out. He stood in the darkness, staring at the land beyond him. Ethan knelt several yards away, careful not to reach for him. "Go on, Rain," he whispered. At last, the lion placed one paw on African soil. A sound rolled somewhere in the distance, low and deep. Another lion. Rain froze, every muscle tight. He did not answer. He only trembled. Hayes watched him closely. "He hears what he belongs to," he said, "but he doesn't know how to belong yet." The weeks that followed were harder than Ethan had imagined. Rain failed at nearly everything. He chased too soon. He tired too quickly. He drank from the wrong places. At night, when hyenas called beyond the dark, he paced the fence line looking for Ethan. Hayes introduced him to a young lioness named Nala, another rescued lion who had learned the land before him. She did not welcome Rain. She swatted at him, snarled when he came too close, and walked away with the cold pride of something that owed him nothing. But Rain followed from a distance. Then came the night of the hyenas. They gathered beyond the outer fence, laughing in the darkness, their shapes moving like broken shadows between the thorn bushes. Rain panicked. He ran toward the inner gate where Ethan stood on the other side, his eyes wide, his breath hard, his whole body begging to be let in. Ethan reached for the latch. Hayes caught his wrist. "If you open that door tonight," he said, "he will never learn he can survive without you." Outside, Rain struck the gate once with his paw. Ethan's face twisted. "He's scared." "Yes," Hayes said, "and so are you." The words almost broke him. Rain backed away from the gate, confused and alone. The hyenas moved closer. Then Nala appeared out of the dark and stood between Rain and the laughing shapes beyond the fence. She snarled once, low and sharp. Rain looked at her. Then he turned back toward the darkness. For the first time in his life, he answered with a roar. It was not strong. It was not full. But it was real. Ethan lowered his hand from the latch. He understood then that love was not always rescue. Sometimes love was standing on the other side of a closed door while the one you loved discovered his own strength. A few days later, Hayes told them it was time to leave. That final night, Rain came to the desert. It was soft at first, almost impossible, tapping gently on the metal roof of the research cabin. Ethan woke before dawn and found Rain lying outside his door, just as he had once lain beside his boot in the old boat shed. For a long time, neither moved. Ethan placed his palm against the wooden door. On the other side, Rain lowered his head until his mane brushed the threshold. Only a few inches of wood separated them, but those few inches held everything Ethan had finally learned. In the morning, he and Luke climbed into the truck. Rain stood on a rise beside Nala, rain darkening the gold of his coat. He did not run after them. Luke wiped his eyes and looked out the back window. "He doesn't need us anymore." Ethan watched until Rain became a shape against the pale horizon. His voice broke when he answered, "Then maybe we did right." The first letters from Dr. Hayes were hopeful. Rain was following Nala farther from camp. He had made his first clean kill. He no longer returned to the fence every night. Then the letters changed. A drought came. Nala was injured. Rain disappeared for days at a time. Then weeks. At last, one envelope arrived with only a single page inside. Rain's tracking collar had been found beside a dry creek bed. There were hyena prints nearby, and no sign of the lion. Hayes had written one final line at the bottom. I do not know if he is alive, but if he is beyond us now. Ethan read it once, then again, and for the first time since the shop window in Savannah, he had no way to save Rain at all. 1 year after leaving Namibia, Ethan Miller came back because silence had become heavier than fear. Luke came with him, though neither brother said much on the flight. There are some journeys people take because they expect a miracle, and some they take because they cannot live another day without knowing whether hope has become grief. Dr. Samuel Hayes met them at the edge of the rehabilitation camp. He looked older than Ethan remembered, leaner, more weathered by sun and disappointment. I need you both to understand, Hayes said. If Rain is alive, he may not come near you, and if he does, he may not be the lion you remember. Ethan looked out toward the thorn trees and dry grass. I know, but he did not know. Not really. For 3 days they searched. The first day brought nothing but heat and old tracks. The second brought a broken branch near a dry creek bed and claw marks on an acacia trunk. On the third morning, one of Hayes's trackers found prints pressed deep into damp sand near a shallow wash. Lion tracks, fresh. By afternoon, clouds gathered over the open country. The air changed first, cooling in a way that made every bird seem to go quiet. Then a fine rain began to fall, soft enough to be mistaken for dust until it touched Ethan's face. Hayes stopped suddenly and raised one hand. On the ridge ahead, a lion stood watching them. Ethan knew him before his mind allowed the thought. The mark beneath the left eye was still there, darker now against the gold of his face. But everything else had changed. Rain was no longer the thin cub from Marley's shop, or the frightened young lion at the gate, begging to be let back into safety. He was broad, powerful, and still in a way that belonged only to wild things. Behind him, half hidden in the grass, stood Nala, and beside her, small and unsure, was a cub. Luke saw it too. "Oh my God," he whispered. Rain had lived, not just lived. He had become a father. Hayes spoke quietly, but the warning in his voice was sharp. Do not call him. Let him decide. Rain started down the ridge. Every step seemed to take a year. Ethan stood with his hands at his sides, fighting every old instinct in his body. He wanted to speak. He wanted to run forward. He wanted to reach for the lion he had once carried through a storm in a wooden crate. But Rain was not his to reach for anymore. Halfway down, Rain stopped. The rain grew stronger then, tapping softly against the hood of the truck, against Ethan's hat, against the sheet metal roof of a small field shelter behind them. That sound moved through the air like a memory. Rain lifted his head. His ears twitched. For one impossible moment, Ethan was back in the old boat shed beside the Savannah River. Back with a wet cub resting his chin on a worn leather boot. Back when a name had become a promise. Ethan's voice broke before the word left him. Rain. The lion's whole body changed. Not into the cub he had been. Not into a pet. But into something that remembered. Rain came forward faster now, crossing the last distance with a force that made Luke step back. Hayes raised one hand, but he did not speak. Rain stopped inches from Ethan. For a heartbeat, there was only breath. Man and lion, past and present. The life that had saved him, and the life he had been set free to find. Then Rain lowered his great head and pressed his forehead against Ethan's chest. Ethan closed his eyes. The sound that rose from Rain's throat was low and deep, not quite a purr, not quite a growl, but something older than either. Ethan lifted his trembling hands and buried them gently in the rough gold of Rain's mane. Luke turned away, crying openly. Even Hayes, who had spent his life warning people not to confuse wildness with affection, stood silent. After a while, Rain pulled back. Nala stepped forward from the grass. She did not come close, but she did not run. The cub moved beside her, blinking at the strangers in the rain. And then Ethan saw it. Beneath the cub's left eye was a small dark streak, shaped almost like a tear. Luke laughed once through his tears. He has his mark. Ethan could not answer. All the pain of letting Rain go, every night of not knowing, every letter, every fear, every mile between Georgia and Africa had led to this. The lion in the shop window had not vanished. He had not been broken by freedom. He had become more than Ethan had ever dared to hope. Rain stood between two worlds for a final moment. In front of him were the men who had saved him. Behind him were Nala and the cub who would never know a cage, never sleep behind a shop window, never learn the sound of rain as a prison roof leaking overhead. Ethan touched Rain's mane one last time. "You did it," he whispered. Then he stopped himself. "No, you did it, Rain." The lion looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he turned and walked back toward Nala. This time Ethan did not call after him. Luke stood beside his brother as Rain, Nala, and the cub moved up the ridge and disappeared into the wet grass. "You okay?" Luke asked. Ethan watched the place where Rain had vanished. "No," he said softly, "but he's free. That's enough." Years later, whenever Rain touched the old tin roof of the boat shed in Savannah, Ethan would stop what he was doing and listen. He did not hear loss in that sound anymore. He heard a lion breathing against his chest beneath an African sky. He heard a cub stepping out beside its mother. He heard the answer to the question that had haunted him for a year. Yes, Rain remembered, but the most beautiful part was that he still walked away. Yes, Rain remembered, but the most beautiful part was that he still walked away. Here is the quiet truth Rain's story leaves behind. Love is not always measured by how tightly we hold on. Sometimes, the deepest love is found in the courage to let go. Ethan and Luke did not save Rain by keeping him beside them forever. They saved him by giving him the chance to become what he was born to be. And that is the lesson this story gives us. Wild animals are not possessions, decorations, or symbols of our affection. They are living beings with instincts, needs, fear, memory, and a place in the natural world that no human love should replace. To care for them truly means respecting their freedom, their danger, and their right to live beyond us. Rain remembered the people who loved him, but he also walked away, and maybe that is what makes the ending so beautiful. He carried the love with him, but he did not belong to it. He belonged to the wild. Now I'd love to hear from you. If you believe animals can remember love, comment 1. If you believe love sometimes means letting go, comment 0. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe and join us for more emotional animal stories about courage, compassion, and the fragile bond between humans and the wild. This story is a fictional, dramatized animal tale created for emotional and educational storytelling. All video visuals are AI-generated illustrations and recreations, not real footage of the events.